Welcome back, my curious listeners. Tonight's story is not for the faint of heart. This is a tale about the things we capture on tape. Things that shouldn't be there. Things that defy explanation. One man's discovery of a strange security tape leads to more than just a mystery. It leads to something far more terrifying. Just a reminder that for the best audio experience, wear headphones. Now at back, turn down the lights, and remember, some things are better left unseen. As a security officer, I've seen plenty of strange things during my time on the job. Drunk people stumbling through parking lots, kids trying to break into buildings for a cheap thrill, or the occasional wild animal tripping alarms. But none of those incidents prepared me for the strangest security tape I've ever seen. It's the kind of thing that gnaws at the back of your mind, makes you question reality itself. I still don't have an explanation for it. Maybe you can make sense of it, though I doubt it. It all started about 2 months ago when I got a call from a property manager asking for help. He sounded pretty shaken, which was odd because the guy, John, wasn't one to get rattled easily. His company managed a handful of small office buildings, and for the most part, my job was pretty uneventful, checking the footage from security cameras and making sure everything was in order. This time, though, he insisted I come in and look at the footage myself. "There's something wrong with the tape from last night," John said over the phone. "I don't know how to explain it, but you need to see it." I sighed, thinking it was probably a glitch, a software error, or someone messing with the cameras. But something in John's voice told me this wasn't a run-of-the-mill issue, so I headed to the property. The office building itself was nothing special. 4 stories, plain brick exterior, and a lobby that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. When I arrived, John was waiting for me in the security room, his face pale and his fingers nervously drumming on the table. "You really need to see this," he muttered, pulling up the footage from the previous night. The security system recorded continuously, but nothing out of the ordinary happened most nights. The timestamp on the footage he queued up showed it was around 2:13 a.m., a normal, quiet night. For the first few minutes, the footage looked normal, just an empty hallway with flickering fluorescent lights. But then, something caught my eye. There was a figure standing at the end of the hallway. I leaned closer to the screen. It was too far away to make out any details, but there was definitely someone standing there, facing the camera. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. John shook his head. "I have no idea. There was no alarm, no door access. No one should have been in the building." I watched for another minute, expecting the figure to move, to walk down the hallway, or do something. But they just stood there. And then, the figure slowly began to walk toward the camera. At first the movement was subtle, but as they got closer, something about the way they walked seemed wrong. The figure's movements were stiff, almost mechanical. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something wasn't right. The figure got closer and closer, until they were just a few feet from the camera. I could finally make out their face, or rather, the lack of one. The person, if you could even call them that, had no face. Their skin was smooth, featureless, like a mannequin, and they stared, if you could call it that, directly into the lens. Then the camera glitched. Just for a second, the screen flickered, and when it came back on, the figure was gone. I paused the footage and looked at John. Was this some kind of prank? A mask? Something? He shook his head again, his face pale. "I don't know, man. I watched the live feed last night. I saw that thing, and then it disappeared. There's no one on the other cameras." I frowned and rewound the footage, expecting some sort of trick or jump cut, but there was nothing. The figure had simply vanished. I pulled up the footage from the hallway camera just before the figure appeared. For hours, the hallway was completely empty, just as it should have been. No sign of the figure entering or leaving. I tried to convince myself that the footage was corrupted, that the camera had glitched, and that what we were seeing wasn't real. But that didn't explain how the figure had vanished, or why John, who had watched it live, had seen the exact same thing. Over the next week, I couldn't shake the memory of that faceless figure. I kept replaying the footage in my mind, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I decided to go back and check the security tapes from earlier nights, just to see if there were any other anomalies. To my surprise, I found something even more disturbing. A week before the faceless figure appeared, the hallway camera had captured another strange event. The timestamp showed it was around 3 a.m. A man in a janitor's uniform walked down the hallway, pushing a cart. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Janitors often worked late, cleaning the offices. But as I watched, I noticed something odd. The man kept walking down the hallway, but he never reached the end. He walked for nearly 5 minutes, but the hallway never changed. The walls, the doors, the lights, it all stayed exactly the same, like he was walking on a loop. The strangest part? His reflection in the glass windows started to distort, becoming blurred and stretched as he moved. But the man didn't seem to notice. Then, after another minute, the man vanished, just like the faceless figure. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I checked the other cameras again, but like before, there was no sign of him. It was as if he had simply walked out of existence. I decided to do some digging. I asked John about the building's history, but he didn't have much information. The property had changed hands several times over the past few decades, but nothing stood out as unusual. I wasn't convinced. There had to be something. Some explanation for the strange things happening in the building. I spent hours searching online, digging through old records, newspaper archives, anything I could find. That's when I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. In 1998, there had been an incident in the very same office building. A janitor named Louis Michaels had gone missing while working a night shift. According to the report, he had been seen on security cameras walking down the hallway, just like in the footage I'd found. But after that, he was never seen again. No body was ever found. His disappearance had been ruled as an unsolved case, but there was something else, something that hadn't been reported in the news. A few weeks after Louis went missing, several employees in the building claimed they had seen him, wandering the halls at night, but when they called out to him, he would simply disappear. The reports were dismissed as hysteria, and eventually the building changed owners, and the case was forgotten, until now. I couldn't stop thinking about the tapes. I'd seen enough strange things on the job to know when something wasn't right, but this was different. It wasn't just a glitch or a trick of the light. Something or someone was still in that building, trapped between worlds. And whatever it was getting closer. A few nights later, John called me again. This time he sounded terrified. "You need to come down here. Now," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's happening again." I rushed to the building, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, John was waiting in the lobby, pale and sweating. Without a word, he led me to the security room and pulled up the live feed from the hallway camera. The faceless figure was back. It stood at the end of the hallway just like before, completely still. But this time, something was different. The lights in the hallway flickered, and the air seemed to distort around the figure, like it was warping reality itself. As we watched, the figure slowly raised its hand and pointed directly at the camera. John cursed under his breath. "What the hell is it doing?" Before I could respond, the screen flickered again. This time, when it came back on, the figure was standing directly in front of the camera, its featureless face filling the screen. Then, the camera went black. John and I sat in stunned silence, staring at the blank screen. Neither of us spoke for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I stood up, my mind racing. "We need to check the hallway," I said, my voice barely a whisper. John nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. Together, we made our way to the hallway where the figure had appeared. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and the lights flickered as we approached the spot where the figure had been standing. But when we got there, the hallway was empty. I turned to John, about to suggest we check the other cameras, when something caught my eye. A faint outline on the floor, just a few feet from where we stood. It was barely visible, like a shadow that didn't belong. As I crouched down to get a closer look, I felt a strange sensation. A pulling, like the air around me was warping, just like on the camera. The shadow on the floor seemed to shift, almost as if it were alive, and for a split second, I saw something. A face. Smooth, featureless, just like the figure on the tape. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "We need to get out of here," I whispered. But before John could respond, the lights went out. The darkness was suffocating. I could hear John breathing heavily beside me, his fear palpable in the pitch-black hallway. We stood frozen, waiting for the lights to flicker back on, but they didn't. Instead, something else happened. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. My chest tightened as I realized the sound wasn't coming from us. It was coming from behind us. I turned slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears, but all I could see was darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just a few feet away. I could feel it, whatever it was, standing behind me, watching. And then, in the silence, a voice. "Help me." The voice was low, barely more than a whisper, but I recognized it. It was the same voice I'd heard on the tape, the same voice that had vanished from the hallway all those years ago. Louis Michaels. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand brushing against something cold and smooth. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't a person. It was nothing. Just empty air. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the presence was gone. The lights flickered back on and the hallway was empty once again. Don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if Louis Michaels is still wandering those hallways, trapped in some kind of limbo, or if the faceless figure was something else entirely, something darker. All I know is that the tapes don't lie. John quit his job a few days after the incident. He couldn't take it anymore, the constant fear of seeing that figure on the cameras again. I don't blame him. I haven't been back to the building since that night, but I still think about it, about what I saw, about the shadow on the floor, and about the voice that called out for help. The strangest security tape I've ever seen wasn't just a glitch. It wasn't a prank or a trick of the light. It was a warning. And whatever is lurking in that building, it's still there. Not everything caught on camera has an explanation. Sometimes the answers lie in the shadows, in the spaces between what we can and can't see. But when the shadows start to move and when voices from the past call out, maybe it's best to leave the mystery unsolved. Until next time, my dear listeners, remember, keep your cameras close, but don't always trust what they show.